Welcome to the debate. Imagine trying to build a skyscraper where every single steel beam wants to be the roof.
Right, that sounds like a disaster.
Exactly. And that is the exact structural nightmare facing Nigeria's opposition ahead of the 2027 elections. You have massively powerful politicians, millions of dedicated voters, distinct regional loyalties, and yet, well, only one presidential ticket.
And, in structural engineering, there's a concept called tensegrity. It looks like magic, really. Heavy beams floating in midair, held together entirely by a continuous network of tension cables. It works because the opposing forces are constantly pulling against each other in perfect balance. But there is no solid foundation. The moment one cable snaps, the whole thing comes crashing down.
Yeah. And right now, the African Democratic Congress, the ADC, is attempting to build the ultimate political tensegrity structure to survive the upcoming election. On April 27, 2026, Lukman Salihu went on national television, Arise Television specifically, to unveil what they are calling the Collegiate system.
Right, a newly unveiled proposal.
Yes, it's a power-sharing formula designed specifically to stop their massive opposition coalition from tearing itself apart after the presidential primary. Which brings us to our central question today. Is this collegiate system a viable, pragmatic structural innovation that can successfully bind a fractured opposition? Or is it an unenforceable political fantasy that ignores Nigeria's constitutional realities and the massive egos of its presidential aspirants?
It's a huge question.
It is. I will argue that the collegiate system is a necessary, highly rational structural solution to the historical winner-takes-all problem that has continuously doomed Nigerian opposition coalitions.
And I will argue that without constitutional backing or a clear mechanism to satisfy the entrenched ambitions of career politicians, this proposal is a legally unenforceable mirage.
Let's ground this in why the ADC even feels the need to invent a new system. They are facing a severe structural risk. You have 4 or more apex-level presidential aspirants who each command very distinct regional loyalty networks.
Powerful networks, yes.
Exactly. The historical reality of Nigerian politics is that power brokers of this magnitude cannot all lose a primary and then quietly, dutifully campaign for the winner. I mean, the winner-takes-all model makes that mechanically impossible.
Because to lose the primary traditionally means you and your entire political network are locked out of federal patronage for 4 to 8 years.
Right, you get nothing. We saw this exact failure mode in 2023. The G5 governors, 5 powerful regional leaders within the PDP, they famously abandoned their candidate, Atiku-Obi.
They did.
And the core driver of that defection was the reality that a winner-takes-all system left them completely out in the cold. They perceived they had no guaranteed stake in his potential presidency, so they walked away. What Lukman Salihu is describing with this collegiate framework is a matrix where decision-making authority is distributed before the election.
Distributed how, exactly?
By pre-negotiating the government, one person does not take everything. If candidate A gets the presidency, candidate B's faction gets the central bank and finance ministry, candidate C controls defense, and so on. Decisions are made as a team, so no single leader behaves as an emperor. It's a pre-primary maneuver to guarantee a tangible stake for all coalition leaders before a single ballot is cast.
That is the theory, sure. And on paper, it sounds wonderfully egalitarian. But let's look at the actual reality on the ground. This proposal fundamentally ignores both the legal parameters of Nigerian governance and the sheer internal chaos currently consuming the ADC.
What do you mean by internal chaos?
Well, if you look at the recent reporting from Saturday Vanguard, the party is racked by intense ego battles and bitter tribal undercurrents. Multiple senior insiders are openly stating that competing ambitions are already tearing these aspirants apart.
But isn't that exactly why a formal system is needed to manage that chaos?
You can't manage chaos with a handshake when the law says otherwise. The 1999 Constitution of Nigeria vests executive authority unilaterally in the president. Yes, the president acts on the advice of the Federal Executive Council, but the ultimate authority is entirely singular. Even if an ADC candidate wins the 2027 election under this shared governance promise, there is absolutely zero legal mechanism to compel that newly sworn-in president to actually honor the deal. It's an empty inducement.
Help me understand your skepticism here, though. You're looking at the end of the road, the swearing in, and pointing out that the Constitution won't legally bind the president to share power. But isn't the collegiate system primarily a survival tool just to reach that swearing in? I mean, politics is about leverage, not just law.
Leverage evaporates the moment the Chief Justice administers the oath of office.
I'm not so sure. Look at how this is already moving from theory to practice regarding these pre-primary inducements. We are seeing tangible evidence of the collegiate concept working right now with the Obi-Kwankwaso alignment.
Oh, the joint ticket?
Yes. Just before Salihu's announcement, it was reported that Peter Obi and Kwankwaso are formalizing a joint ticket. Kwankwaso's spokesperson, Habibu Mohammed, explicitly confirmed that Kwankwaso has agreed to serve as Obi's running mate. He stated he is ready for any role that can legally remove the incumbent from office.
That is a massive concession for Kwankwaso, admittedly.
It is monumental. It demonstrates that apex-level players in this coalition are willing to accept secondary roles for the sake of the broader movement. The Kwankwasia movement has an iron grip on Kano and the Northwest. The obedient movement commands massive numbers in the South.
Right.
Blending them requires someone to step down from the top spot. Kwankwaso doing so is the beating heart of the collegiate system in action.
I come at it from a different way. You are pointing to Kwankwaso's willingness to take the VP slot as proof that these massive egos can be managed. But let's bring in the ultimate stress test for this collegiate theory. Atiku Abubakar.
The perennial candidate.
Exactly. While former President Obasanjo is reportedly driving this Obi-Kwankwaso alignment behind the scenes, Dele Momodu, who leads Atiku's camp within the ADC, is aggressively pushing a completely contradictory arrangement.
He wants Atiku at the top.
Yes, he is demanding an Atiku-Obi ticket, where Obi is relegated to the running mate. At the same time, you have figures like Senator Victor Ume publicly telling Atiku that he needs to step aside for a younger generation.
Which makes sense, given Atiku has been running for the presidency since 2003.
Right, but think about the mechanics of the collegiate system here. What possible inducement within a power-sharing matrix could you offer a man who has relentlessly chased the absolute peak of executive power for 3 decades? His entire political network is built on the promise of him taking the top seat. If the collegiate system asks him to accept a senior advisory role, that asks him to dismantle 30 years of political infrastructure.
Well, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it assumes the collegiate system only has 2 highly coveted seats, the presidency and the vice presidency. It assumes that if Atiku doesn't get one of those 2, the system inevitably collapses. But the whole point of a matrix is to widen the board. Let's look at the entry of the 5th major aspirant, Mohammed Hayatu-Deen.
The former managing director of FSB International Bank.
Yes, an economist, a highly successful businessman, and a 2022 PDP primary contender from Borno State. He is positioning himself as the technocratic alternative to the career politicians. His presence in the race precisely proves why a broader collegiate distribution is essential. A collegiate framework can offer immensely powerful, highly specific portfolios that appeal to different types of ambition.
Such as?
Imagine a coordinating minister of the economy role, or a super ministerial portfolio that has complete autonomy over national fiscal policy. Cabinet positions have a known hierarchy of political value. The collegiate system isn't just about patting Atiku on the back and telling him to retire. It's about creating a complex power-sharing matrix where all 5 aspirants, including technocrats like Hayatu-Deen, have defined, guaranteed influence that satisfies their specific basis.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that that is exactly where the math of this matrix starts to break down? Because this isn't just about finding a nice, prestigious economic portfolio for a technocrat. This is about the visceral, zero-sum game of regional power rotation.
The North versus South dynamic.
Yes, you cannot separate the collegiate system's structural promises from the intense regional demands currently pulling the ADC apart. The tension cables in your metaphor are made of regional expectations.
Well, let's look at how the Obi-Kwankwaso camp is attempting to engineer those specific cables. They are lobbying northern leaders right now with a highly specific arrangement, a one-term power rotation.
Mm.
The pitch is that Peter Obi would serve a single 4-year presidential term and then immediately rotate power back to the north.
A handshake promise to give up power?
A mathematically sound compromise. Look at the raw numbers of the Fourth Republic. Under Obasanjo, Jonathan, and the current tenure of Tinubu, the South will have governed for 16 years. Under Yardwa and Buhari, the North governed for 11 years.
Okay, the numbers do lean south.
Exactly. The obedient camp is essentially telling the North, let us balance this historical ledger with one final 4-year term for the South, and then the presidency is yours. It is an equitable pitch that perfectly embodies the shared sacrifice the collegiate system requires.
Sure, but think about the actual calculations being made by Northern political leadership, because they categorically reject that math. Consider Atiku's interview on Arise television back on April 15th. He argued that the South has governed for 18 years and the North for only 10.
But Pegasus reporters immediately fact-checked that. They noted Atiku was conflating the PDP's internal zoning rules with the total duration of national governance across all political parties. His math was technically wrong.
The factual accuracy of his math is completely beside the point. Whether it's 16 to 11 or 18 to 10, his flawed arithmetic reflects a very real, unyielding emotional and political calculation by Northern elites. They feel fundamentally in a deficit.
So they want it back immediately.
Yes, their position is that the ticket must return to the North immediately, not in 4 years after a hypothetical Peter Obi term, now. Vanguard reported on these severe tribal undercurrents. Northern figures strongly suspect that the Obasanjo-backed Obi axis has already predetermined a Southern presidency behind closed doors. They don't view the collegiate system as a benevolent power-sharing tool. They view it as a Trojan horse designed to secure a Southern president while neutralizing Northern opposition.
But that suspicion is exactly why a formal 50-member committee has been set up by the Obi and Kwankwaso camps. They know the North is anxious about a Trojan horse. So they are working to make Obi's one-term promise public and explicitly binding within the party's manifesto. If they formalize that within the collegiate framework, it diffuses the anxiety. It transforms a whisper into a coalition treaty.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You keep using words like formalize, binding, and treaty. But legally speaking, those words are ghost. They require a legal mechanism to mean anything. And the fatal flaw of the collegiate system, the reason this building cannot stand, is that it possesses zero legal authority. We're talking about a political party that doesn't even have a legally recognized foundation at this very moment.
You're referring to the ongoing INEC leadership dispute.
Exactly. The Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, doesn't currently recognize a clear leadership structure for the ADC. You have factions. The Supreme Court heard the David Mark-led leadership appeal on April 22nd with no judgment yet delivered. Two factions are essentially fighting over who actually owns the party name and the right to field a candidate.
Right, and as of this reporting, no judgment has come down.
Yes, and meanwhile, the electoral clock is ticking incredibly fast. INEC's primary window already opened on April 23rd. This absolute vacuum of legal authority prompted the opposition's Ibadan declaration over the weekend, where they basically begged INEC to extend the primary window to the end of July.
Because without a recognized chairman, INEC won't validate whatever primary the ADC holds.
Precisely. So before we even debate the high-minded theory of enforcing a complex collegiate power-sharing matrix inside the presidential villa, we have to acknowledge there is no legal vehicle for the party itself to operate. If the foundation doesn't exist in the eyes of the law, the collegiate framework is dead on arrival.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. That is a harsh assessment of the legal landscape, but I think you are judging a political maneuver purely by the standards of constitutional law, which misses the underlying game theory here.
How so?
The strictures of the 1999 Constitution, where the president retains unilateral authority, or the current procedural delays at the Supreme Court, they obscure what Lukman Salihu is actually trying to achieve. The collegiate system isn't a legal contract. It is a political pact. It's a coalition survival tool designed to unite the obedient movement and the Kwankwaso movement against APC incumbency. It is enforced by political gravity.
Explain what you mean by political gravity.
You have the obedient movement with its electoral footprint in the South.
You have the Kwankwaso movement with its grip on the Northwest. Standing alone, neither of these movements can overcome the sheer incumbency advantage of the ruling APC. They know this. If they don't merge, they lose. But more importantly, if they do merge, win, and then the new president breaks the collegiate agreement, what happens?
The president governs anyway because the Constitution says they can't.
Legally, yes. But politically, they lose the coalition that put them there. If a President Peter Obi or a President Kwankwaso marginalizes the other factions after taking the oath, their governance becomes practically impossible. They wouldn't have the legislative numbers in the National Assembly. They wouldn't have the regional governors backing their policies. The survival of the movement enforces the pact. The fear of a paralyzed, failed term is the tension cable keeping everyone honest.
History strongly disagrees with that theory. Once a Nigerian president is sworn in, they don't need the coalition that got them there to govern.
You don't think a fractured coalition can paralyze a president?
I think the constitutional powers of the Nigerian presidency are so overwhelmingly vast, so absolute, that the political leverage of a Kwankwaso or a Hayatu-Deen evaporates the second they are no longer needed to win an election. We have seen this. The power of the pen and Aso Rock control over the military, the national oil revenues, the federal agencies, it is absolute. If the consensus candidate decides to govern without sharing power, what is the collegiate going to do?
They would rebel politically. They would block legislation.
And the president would bypass them. The Constitution grants the president absolute immunity and unilateral executive power. A political handshake agreement, no matter how publicly broadcasted on Arise TV, cannot override the supreme law of the land.
Well, I maintain that the collegiate system, despite its clear lack of constitutional precedent, is a highly pragmatic and essential political innovation. It provides a necessary framework to merge distinct regional loyalty networks and explicitly addresses the grievances that destroyed past opposition coalitions. It is a bold structural attempt to guarantee a stake for everyone, which is the only way a mega-coalition survives to see Election Day.
And I maintain that while the diagnosis of the opposition's problem is spot on, the structural integrity of this collegiate plan is an illusion. Without hard legal enforcement mechanisms and facing the sheer gravity of Atiku's historical ambition alongside a ticking INEC electoral clock, this shared governance model cannot survive contact with actual executive power.
It is a fascinating standoff, but I think we can both clearly agree on one thing. The ADC is currently operating under immense, almost unprecedented simultaneous pressure. They are being squeezed from within by competing egos, squeezed from the courts with the unresolved David Mark leadership appeal, and relentlessly squeezed by the electoral calendar.
Absolutely. The next few months are going to be incredibly critical to Nigerian political history. The true test of this collegiate system isn't going to be the lofty concept of shared power itself. It will be measured by the absolute specificity of the commitments this committee can produce and somehow force these candidates to stick to.
Exactly. It all comes down to whether those tension cables can hold when the real weight of ambition is finally applied. We invite you to keep exploring these unfolding political dynamics in the source material, as there is clearly much more to unpack. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.